Sherry. And now I'm going to talk to you about one thing that I've mentioned already, which are the asymmetric established disadvantages or the established asymmetric disadvantages. They are just specific kind of a pain that affects customers, or clients, or even stakeholders that very much relates to the disruptive approach. Okay, one thing that is specific to our EXO sprints is precisely the disruption. We are trying to identify a disruption, and then we are doing two kinds of answers to the disruption. One is react to the disruption to make sure that we have continuity of our business model at the core. And the other one is becoming the disruption. Okay, so it's all about disruption. So what are those pains that we could tackle in order to become disruptive? Is there anything such a, is there any approach or methodology or trick that we can apply for that? And I would say yes, and this is precisely where the established asymmetric advantage come to play. So it's all about once again, reassessing our core assumptions. We've talked about how we should reinterpret our industry, our business challenge, the problem space, the purpose of the organization, the way we create value, the relationship with the customers. And these, I mean, it might be obvious to some extent when we are trying to seek for an incremental performance improvement, but when we want something radical, we need to radically reassess our value proposition. Everybody today is customer-centric, but I would say that is not necessarily true. I mean, we talk about ourselves being customer-centric, but we are not ready to revisit some fundamental assumptions regarding our customers. I'm going to give you some examples that all of you have heard of. Netflix did not kill the blockbuster, ridiculous late fees did. Uber did not kill the taxi business, limited access and fair control did. Apple did not kill the music industry, being forced to buy full-length albums did. Okay, so you see here that as customers, this was the norm, this was the reality. It was established that you had to buy the full album, the full LP, in order to hear for a song, and they will not even give you the lyrics, okay? So, but nobody was ready to challenge these because it wasn't on the radar. It wasn't something that, I mean, it was already an assumption. So if we can identify some of these assumptions that might be very disadvantaged and very asymmetric for our clients, we might have something disruptive to our own industry, to our own activity or business model. Okay, so I'm going to give you many more examples.
Can I add a quick point to that?
Please.
We've got very quick. So Apple killed its streaming service, I think, last year, and the reason was there you had the next step was being forced to buy a single song killed Apple's streaming service instead of Spotify that says you don't have to buy the songs, you can just stream them. So this cycle keeps continuing.
Thank you. So yes, what if we had a radical focus on customers? What if we really put people first? And what would be a radical value proposition that people would love to hear from us? So of course, that is going to depend massively on the industry. We saw that late return fees kill Blockbuster, and we see that these kind of practices, they are systematic. There's many legacy companies largely benefit from established asymmetries that represent a major disadvantage for customers, okay? So let's see, this is a question that we should be asking ourselves. What are the asymmetric disadvantages systematically affecting your clients, okay? If we go, for example, to the telecom industry, I happen to have a contract for my house, and because I'm only interested on the streaming and on internet, but you know what? I am forced to owe a fixed telephone number. You know, one of these old dialing numbers. Because why? Well, I don't know. I don't know why. I have a number that I never used, and I have a phone that I've never plugged. So I'm forced to doing so by the telecom company. So why should I have a phone line in order to have smart TV? It doesn't make any sense. So if we jump to another industry, like the oil industry, there's this effect in the oil industry that is called the feather rocket effect. If you go pumping your pumping gas in your car, and the price of oil has rocketed in origin, you're going to see that price modification instantly. Your price is going to rise instantly. But if the price in origin of the oil has dropped massively, you will not notice that right away. It'll take some time for you to notice that price decrease, right? So this is called the feather rocket effect, and that brings massive benefits to the oil companies, although we could say it's massively disadvantages for us. It's asymmetric, and there is actually no reason beyond the benefit of the company for doing so. Okay, so this is the kind of template that we're going to be using for the exercise that I'll introduce in a second. We are talking about transitioning from AEDIs, asymmetric established disadvantages, and turning them into the ideas. I have here a little icon of how you can, if you identify an AEDI, you can propose righting the wrong and then proposing ideas out of them. Okay, so in this case, for the feather rocket effect, we have the industry in which it's relevant, the oil industry. Then we have an example of a company benefiting from this AEDI, which could be Repsol in Spain. The proposed name, sometimes these effects are none and have a name, some other times they don't. If you find one, I'm going to ask you to please name them, give a name to these effects. Describe them briefly. In this case, is gas prices at station reflect price increases of oil immediately and delay price decreases. Okay, you can describe then the unfair advantage for the company, benefits from the delay period, or the abusive disadvantages for customers, paying an artificial price. Okay, so, and then in the bottom section here, we are turning these into an idea. So how can we right the wrong? So you can have gas stations reflecting instantly the price variation as they vary. Okay, so that could be a very simple approach once you have detected an AEDI, which is a specific sort of pain, to turn it into an idea that has some potential for disruption. Let's see some other examples. In banking, for example, there's plenty in the banking industry. So an internal Santander memo leaked to Guardian Money that 10% of its global profits come from internal cash transfers, and it charges 6 times more than newer rivals, right? So this is a clear example of an established asymmetric disadvantages. But there's companies that do not conform with the status quo, they do not comply, and they come up with specific value propositions to right these wrong, okay? For example, arbitrary and fixed exchange rates are an issue. So there is a company that's called Transferwise that it's creating a new value proposition, righting the previous wrong, which is now we can allow you to send money with the real exchange rate. You can choose when you make the conversion to benefit from a better conversion rate. No more fixed rates. Sorry about that mistake here. So how would we feel the template of the AEDI to idea? So in this case, in the banking industry, we have, for example, the Santander, and the proposed name for this AEDI would be arbitrary and fixed exchange rates. I mean, nothing very creative, but it's descriptive. Here's the description that I just read. Here's the unfair advantages observed for the company. It says that 10% of its global profits come from this AEDI, and this is the abusive disadvantages for customer. When we are feeling these abusive disadvantages, or when we're trying to identify an AEDI, let's make sure that it's something really unfair or not transparent, and it's arbitrary. Okay, there is no reason besides the profit of the company for doing so. So, and here on the bottom part, we have an example of a company writing the AEDI. Sometimes you will find companies that are correcting this situation. Some other times will not. For this exercise, we're going to prefer you coming up with your own AEDIs. We're going to ask you to identify AEDIs in a specific industry, and then we're going to ask you to propose your own ideas, righting the wrong. Okay. If you don't come up with your own ideas, you might be able to find a startup that is righting the wrong, in which case we're going to ask you to give us a name and describe their value proposition. Okay? Are we clear? All right. So there is one important thing also here to observe here, which is that the newcomers will attack the profitable slides without offering all of the services. See, that is the beauty of it. Transferwise is not a full bank. It just offers specific ideas or specific value proposition to write what has proven to be wrong. So they do not, Amazon is not replicating necessarily all of the services that a bank has, but they will just focus on where they can add a lot of value. Okay, so another AEDIs in the banking industry, delay between payment and delivery. It's an issue for everyone, and especially an issue for small holders, farmers, that they often face, and they prevent them from doing a good provision of funds and sophisticating the means, etc. So Agri Digital proposed a transaction solution that enables real-time payment on delivery. See, this is a wrong that is being right by a company, by a startup that will be disruptive to some of the activities of the banks. Okay, so questions on this? Are we clear with this concept of the AEDIs and how we turn them into the ideas? No doubts?
Maybe I could ask a question. Could anybody come up with where they personally suffer from an ID?
Yes, whenever I travel, and I travel from India to Australia, I take US dollars. When I go to Australia, they say use Australian dollars. So the actual conversion rates between India and my usage currency in any country, there is a lot of money which gets eaten away by the banks. So I think all travelers suffer on this.
Thank you, Matt.
So when you travel, for example, you buy a flight ticket, but that is not your own ticket. It's the company's ticket. They can do whatever they want with your ticket. You cannot resell it. You cannot transfer it. They can even cancel it. Yes. They can overbook the flight too. So that is to some extent also unfair. And it's established. Nobody questions that. So if you can find some of those established truths that represent a massive disadvantage for your customer, you might be onto something.
I've got one. When you use Airbnb, as soon as you book, you have to pay. But as the host, you only get payment when the guest checks in, and that might be 10 months away. So Airbnb use that float and make interest from it.
All right, that's a very good one. Yeah. Anybody else?
Would similar to that, would simply how we, in accounting terms, how there's delayed payment for any sort of invoicing, and sort of the larger you are in terms of a company, you can set your payment terms. The further down you are in the value chain, you're just you just have to accept the fact that you're not going to be paid for 3 months. Is that in the same genre?
That is a great one. That is a very good one. That is established. Everybody accepts that worldwide, and it doesn't make any sense. So exactly, if you could correct that situation. Go ahead, Penny. Yeah.
That's what I typed in the chat. Exactly the same thing as Amanda said. Very frustrating.
Great. Your minds are connected. All right. So I guess that we are understanding. This is actually, this is something that I have come up with. I don't think there's a better way to address the cracks in the business model than identifying some of those assumptions. And you will see that those are assumptions too that we could revisit. See, if we want to be disruptive, we need to be radical. That is, go to the root. And at the root, we will find assumptions that other people will not revisit, will not reassess. We as disruptors need to do so, okay? So another example, fees are an issue for the banking industry, and here's a bank with no fees. Insurance, there's many on the insurance. I'm not gonna jump into that because we're gonna actually ask you to reflect a little bit on some of those industries and also banking, but also in insurance. So let me go to my next slide here. So I was saying before that legacy companies largely benefit from established asymmetries that represent a major disadvantages for customers. If you identify those established asymmetries, they signal the gateways for external disruption and also the pathway towards true customer centricity. This is giving no entrance competitive advantages to win over customers. Okay, so now...
Could I add a quick point on the ID?
Oh, yes.
Yes, so I would also, you know, I talked about system friction. So imagine the example of Uber. So if you previously wanted a taxi, you had to, there was a kind of a big process to go and get one. Either you had to go out in the street, wait in the rain, you weren't sure when it was coming, how much it would cost you. All of that was friction to do with this system that human beings had created, which was the taxi system, in order to get you from point A to point B. And what Uber did was they solved a lot of that friction as well as the ID. So the ID was around the addition, you know, the fixed fares and the excessive costs of taxis and the availability, but the friction was also solved. So I think I would also add in, when we're looking at the ID, also think about in the future, maybe not for this exercise, but for future, think about what friction are you solving as well, that could be solved within that initiative.
So once again, the value that these adds over the frictions, I believe, is these assumptions. Some of these things are so co-substantial to the industry or to the activity that people will not dare touching it or revisiting it. And that is precisely what these concept of the IDs adds on top of everything else. All right. So go ahead.
So you may have a lot of these AEDs around the globe, but when you go into a sprint, how do we link up a problem which may not be central to the company we are trying to do a sprint? For example,
so in two different ways. In two different ways.
How does it affect that?
Yeah. So there's two different ways for that. One of them, when you're working at the core, if you can identify some things that you as a company are doing that are really like established asymmetric disadvantages, that is a shortcut for what you should be doing. Okay. I mean, you're not delivering a really customer centricity, and there's a major area there for improvement. So that could be one of your focus when you're working at the core, but also when you're working at the edge too. You could say, I mean, this company, our bank, is doing this, and there's no way this project is actually going to happen within the company. So we can propose to disrupt ourselves at the edge of the company, to take these ideas and try to turn it into a disruptive idea at the edge of the company.
I'd also add that IDs can drive quite a large proportion of revenue and profit, as we saw with Santander. And for large legacy companies, especially on the revenue side, it doesn't take that much of a revenue reduction to actually make the company not viable anymore as a business. And so I think a lot of these companies are almost reliant on their IDs to be able to continue to operate, because the structure underneath is relatively inefficient because it's always been taking advantage of these IDs. I'll give you an example. We did a project for Vodacom in South Africa, a sprint. And one of the challenges they had was they make a lot of money from charging for data. And they have some of the highest data costs in the world. But, data is going to just get cheaper and cheaper. The government was mandating it. So regulatory pressure was coming in to make data cheaper. And also things like global internet are coming along. So those two are already, separately affecting the ID of this company. And they already knew that was happening. So the question was, what do we do as data costs, as what we can charge for data starts to fall towards zero, and how can we sustain our business? That was one of the core questions to address.
So is it good to bring it down anytime during the first and second week before you shortlist the initiative?
So it does make a lot of sense to, I mean, when you're doing the disruption research, we talk about doing an intentional research. And this is a very good way to approach that research. What are we taking for granted? What are our assumptions? And specifically in our relationship with customers, what are our assumptions? Are there any IDs? And what could turn these IDs irrelevant? You might find there some trends or some technologies or some business model specific startups that will right the wrong that you're doing. By the way, let me insist on one thing, which is that this AEDI approach is not specific to our, I mean, it makes a lot of sense in the context of our framework, but it's not something really embedded. You will not find these AEDIs concept in the book yet, because it's something that I have actually added to the process, okay?
Very good, yeah.
All right. So if you think about this, I mean, this is why we are here. This is so fundamentally optimistic. I mean, the massive transformative purposes are all about righting the wrong or doing great things for humanity as a whole, or for a specific subgroup of a humanity. And this is also about identifying things that we're not doing right and try to right those wrongs. So I mean, it's all about trying to be better as a norm, right? In every field, in every opportunity that we have, try to be a little more consistent, a little more balanced, and better as a whole. So that's why I believe working in this context is so motivating, at least for me, because we are trying to improve things massively, radically, right? Okay, now we're gonna I'm gonna describe the homework for you. You can have an intuition of what's gonna be. So we're going to ask you to select one of these industry, banking, insurance, or airlines, if you want. And we're going to ask you to identify two IDs for that industry that you have selected, 2 asymmetric established disadvantages. And then I'm going to ask you, out of those 2, to select one of them and to name it and to describe it and to try to think of a potential idea resulting from righting the wrong. What does that mean? Well, it's not just any idea. It's an idea that should be ideally the opposite of what's going on, right? You're turning, it's the reflection in the mirror, right? So that's why we have this icon here. So exactly your value proposition should be the writing what is wrong represented on the AEDI, okay? And for that, I've created these little templates. Hopefully you know by now how to use it. So you'll be filling 2 templates and with a little more focus on one of them, the one that you'll be naming and further developing. Okay, so how are we going to do the allocation of themes, Saul?
I think you could just do team 1, team 2, and then airlines team 3 in the virtual team. Would that work for everyone? Yeah, so if you were in team 1, then you do banking. If you're in team 2, you do insurance. If you were in team 3 or the virtual team, you do airlines. And I can put that back up on Slack. What I would say is, Diego, if you agree, to make sure it's not too easy, that we don't include exchange rates and fees in the banking one.
Yes,
otherwise,
I mean, that would be...
I've already given you all the answers. So I think you cannot use, I see Mahesh smiling, you cannot use exchange rates or fees for the banking one, if that's okay.
Okay, so any questions about the template? All clear, all set? Great. So this is awesome. We have completed the content that we had thought for today, and we can dedicate the next 7 minutes to some Q&A. So I'm going to actually ask Saul to lead this section.
Okay, so any questions on the content we covered? Obviously, this is more Diego's expertise, but I'll try and answer it. Otherwise, also happy to answer general questions on the training or anything else you have.
I have a question. Sorry.
I'll jump in then. Just quick one, very simple one.
James, I think Gail's first. She jumped in.
Oh, sorry.
I'll go to you, James, after. So Gail, Tom, James.
Yeah, I've just got a question about when you would do that in the process. So when you would actually, because I just found that what you described then, Diego, really powerful. So where in the 10-week sprint do you think that it's worthwhile actually looking at that and flipping to the idea? Because it's that flipping that really helps spark the disruption. So where would you put it in the 10-week process?
Sure. I mean, I'll answer from my view. I think it's week 1 because you're doing research into the industries, you're doing research into potential startups that could disrupt you, and this gives you a framework to think about where the disruption might come from. Diego?
Absolutely, yes. I think before even you see, there is a period which is a preparation period in which we try to have a shared understanding of the company. So what is the business model canvas of the company? What is the industry? What are the major challenges that these industries facing? And then when we have that, I think it's a very good moment to start doing the disruption research, because as I said before, the disruption is specific to someone or to something, to specific activity or part of a business model. Disruption necessarily relates to something else. So we have a clear understanding of what is it that we're doing, and then we try to identify what might be disruptive to our activity. Right in that process, if we find some of the assumptions on the way we relate to our customers, and we find some massive disadvantage, some established asymmetric disadvantages, that is a very, very good spot for research, because it's going to give you, without having the solution yet, it's going to give you a great problem to focus on.
Sorry, I'm just going to, before we go to other questions, I forgot to say who's presenting tomorrow. Thank you, Diego and Suman, for reminding me. So tomorrow's presenters are Amar, Gail, and Lyndall. So presenting is Amar, Gail, and Lyndall, and giving feedback will be Andrew and Amanda. So feedback is Andrew and Amanda. I'll put this up on Slack as well. I think we had a question next was from Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Sol. I'm curious to hear, I mean, I love those examples from, say, from banking and the airlines. Can you just give me just a couple of other examples where you've actually used it in real sprints? So you've been running a sprint and you've come up with, here's the AEDI and here's the gap, and let's go do something about it.
Should I go with?
Please.
I'll go with one. So we did a sprint for a large financial services company, and they did online trading was one of the main revenue streams for this company. And they knew, and usually companies actually know where their IDs are and what's going to be disrupting. They charged fees, obviously, for their trading. But they knew that eventually, within a short time frame, it would go to 0 fees for the trading. And actually, new competitors come in, and what it did was it drove those fees down to close to 0 for trading costs. And what the company did by doing the sprint was able to anticipate this coming up and then come up with new initiatives that would help counteract that drop in revenue for them. And it happened, I think, within 18 months or so of them doing the sprint that actually came to be in the market, that the trading fees dropped. I think, and don't quote me, I think it was Robinhood is the company that brought that disruption in that industry, but it may be some others as well.
Right, thank you. So they brought their own disruption in. They said, okay, this is going to happen. We're going to lose fees. Let's find other ways of increasing our revenue or replacing that revenue.
Exactly. Usually clients, I think, have a sense of their ID. If you're doing a sprint, your clients have usually a driver for doing the sprint. And it can be that they want to just do better, but it can be that they can see that one of their IDs is about to be disrupted or will be disrupted soon. And it forms such a critical component of their revenue and profit that if they don't do something about it, they're going to have a problem down the line.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Nevertheless, I want to insist on these being just one of those many assumptions that you can revisit, okay, to try to understand where disruption might come from. So that is one that I believe is very relevant, focusing on the customer relationship. But of course, there might be many, like the value or the very business or the value proposition. Sorry, the way that you're delivering the value or relationship with partners. All of those things, or even with stakeholders, might be subjective of revision, and this is just one area that focuses radically on the customer. Okay, there is a question here from Amar about. He was saying it was a bit unclear on how exactly to describe the proposed name quadrant for the AEDI canvas. Okay, so here, as Sherry suggested, it's all about giving a description a short description of the AEDI. This idea of finding a name is a very good exercise that applies throughout the sprint. Having a name for the team is very, very helpful because it creates a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging. Having a name for the initiative just as much, very, very useful to refer to it in a very fast way and to connect to this initiative and communicate the initiative faster. Having a name for the scenarios that you're working on is also very useful. So you come up with a scenario. We believe that the drones are going to be populating our roads and all of the traffic is going to go aerial. And having a name like the air borough for that scenario also is a very good practice. You have a condensed formulation of the whole scenario into just that name. The same applies to the IDs. If you can find a name such as the feather rocket effect, or any name that you can refer the ID, or you can use to name the ID with, that will be much easier to communicate and to manipulate even these ID. Okay, so that is a.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to just jump to James if I can get to him because I know he had a question before we.
Please.
Thanks. Mine was a really simple question, but before I jump to that quickly, this extra 15 minutes is fantastic. I'm learning probably just as much in these 15 minutes extra parts as the hour before. So thank you for creating that space. My question was to Diego, very simple one. Those 3 sections, or those 3 components of the feedback for the BMCs, I got 2 and 3, use of the framework and presentation quality. Number 1, was that the initiative itself?
Yes, it is. And the order is not necessarily the right order. You can decide to focus on whatever parts you want. Hopefully you'll be focusing first on a balanced approach to these 3 with a stronger focus on the methodology. And when we are providing feedback, of course, it's not about, and I'm going to say this, very clear. It's not about showing how clever you are or how wrong they are, but it's about giving them ways out and alternatives, right? We want to help them understand alternatives with actionable insights, right? One more trick is try to focus on what has not already been said, because it's all about adding value to the people, to the participants.
I think just very quickly, we had a question from Andrew, which is good. Do edge teams come up with ideas that disrupt the core assumptions? So personal view is the idea is more related to the core because it's around external disruption and internal response. But Diego, it'd be interesting to see your view.
Yes, I think this is a good interpretation, but just remember that when you're at the edge, you might be disrupting your own industry or completely different industry, adjacent industry. For example, when I was working with HP, we identify that one of the core activities that they did very, very well was precision placement. So I mean, they have like mechanisms to have a placement of ink in a surface or color in a surface. So if they were able to understand what they did very well and try to become relevant in an adjacent sector. So we were exploring cosmetics or health and how this precision placement capability could be applied and relevant in that other content, in other context or arena. So adjacent industry or even a completely different industry that is unrelated, and yet there you might have a massive impact and become disruptor. And there's a third alternative, which is creating a whole new industry. You might, by means of these initiatives, create an industry that has not been categorized yet. So all of these are possibilities, possible outcomes of the edge. Okay. So now time is up. Maybe we have time for the very last question if you want. Okay, so we'll let you go.
Thank you.
Yes, I hope we had a good session today and you enjoy. Hopefully you'll find the assignment clear and enjoyable too. We will see tomorrow what you were able to come up with.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye. Bye.